Of Jason's family is here today to cheer him on or to intimidate him or something. I'm not sure. So that's what we're glad to have them here. But without any more introduction, Jason, come tell us about what you do to help make the farm profitable, all right? All by yourself.
Thank you. Well, like Jimmy said, my name's Jason. I am third generation at Beecham Alexander Farm. My daughter just joined the family business this year to make it the fourth generation, and we've got 5 grandkids now, so hopefully we'll have a fifth generation to keep things going. But a little bit of a background, like I said, we are strictly cow-calf operation. University of Kentucky first came to UK, late 70s, early 80s, introduced no tillage to us. I was not very old, so I don't remember about the early days of that. Dad was behind that, him and Gary Lacefield. We did that for 30 years at no-till. It was great, everything made it a lot easier, a lot less labor intensive, a lot fuel savings. But fast forward 30 years to take 10 years ago, 12 years ago, we started noticing our forages not producing, not yielding like we had been seeing. So trying to figure out what the problem was, we came back to no tillage. I believe that over a 7-year period, we tried this one particular hayfield 4 times in 7 years with failure. Seed would come up in the fall. We'd think we had another home run. In the spring, it was nothing there. After talking to some other producers, it was maybe the idea was introduced to us that maybe we was looking at a soil compaction problem. So we purchased an inline ripper and busted up the hard pan. We actually went down to about 16 inches and began old school and brought out the plow and started turning our ground over. We did this again with a couple of trials that we just thought it was basically simple. You turn your ground over, you disc it, you sow your seed, and it'll come up. And it did. But come spring, no grass again. Kind of getting tired of it. Expensive. Felt like a failure, but I reached out to, I believe I emailed Chris and I talked to Jimmy, and both of them actually came back with the same thing, that basically told me and Dad and my uncle that you're never too old to learn something, that even with the years of experience that they've got, our seed bed wasn't prepared. It was too fluffy, is what Chris's words were. So we went and bought a cultipacker, and after we rolled her over and dished her up, we cultipacked it, sowed it with a buggy per soil sample with phosphate and potash, and at 40 pound. Now we did go to 40 pound to the acre on our fescue. Seems a little heavy, but in a minute I'll get to that. We feel like it pays off for us. But once we did that and sowed it, then we came back with a cultipacker again for seed to soil contact, and then a chain harrow to just kind of work in more or less the tracks that maybe the tractor and the buggy had left behind. So our first successful year was in 17. These pictures are actually a second cutting that Jimmy actually came out to the farm and took. He was just out visiting. But we seeded that field that year. It's 50 acres in that field. We seeded it 35 pound to the acre. We got 2 cuttings off of it. They came up to 6 3/4 pound or ton to the acre. But we also grazed it 30 head for 60 days in the fall after that. Now, after each cutting, we came back with 50 units of nitrogen for the regrowth, and it was, again, we thought we had a home run, and we did, but we like to call it an in-park home run because the next spring it was gone. Kind of think maybe we over grazed it in the fall, maybe too short, and then maybe a harsh winter got it. We're not real sure. But nonetheless, we had to start over again. So when we finally decided that and it's been touched on today on height, cutting height, grazing height, we adopted those ideas as well, and we don't cut below 5 inches. We don't like to graze below 5 inches. and we see that regrowth just tremendous. This particular hayfield was actually the field that we failed. We had 4 failures in 7 years on. But once we got it right, we feel like it was a grand slam. You can see the windrows, how big they are. You can see how close they are together. I believe first year on this field, 57 acres. If I remember right, Dad, it first cutting it was 263 rolls, 5x5s, and then second cutting with 50 units of nitrogen. Second cutting was 258 rolls. So second cutting pretty well matched first cutting. Unbelievable turnout. I mentioned a while ago that when we seed reseed our hay fields, that we do it with fertilized in our seed by the soil sample. Well, something that we got to thinking about and wanted to try was applying our nitrogen in the fall. I know that's not necessarily conventional thinking, but it's not new thinking either. This field being our first one we tried it with, we really felt like that's the way to go. So the next year we tried it on 2 more fields, and now we're doing it on all our hay ground. Except for this year, with as dry as it is, we don't feel like adding nitrogen right now would do much good unless we get our rain. We do think that if the grass is actively growing as late as in November, and we have tried that and had success with it. The years that we were trying it, hay fields that did get the nitrogen in the fall as opposed to in the spring, when we came in with 100 units of nitrogen in the spring, the fields that got nitrogen in the fall outproduced the fields that got the nitrogen in the spring. I think the consensus is on that we're getting a better root system in the fall of the year, so the grass has a chance to jump and take off in the spring. And we don't have to worry about trying to get in our fields when it's wet, muddy, rutting up your hay fields and whatnot. On our pastures, kind of the same thing. Our pastures seemed like they weren't yielding like they had in the past. Obviously, what's everybody battling in the spring in Kentucky? Buttercup. We first started spraying for it in 2000, and have sprayed for it every year since, and it just seems like it comes back worse every year. A couple of 3 years ago, I noticed our hay fields didn't have it, and a light bulb kind of went off that maybe, yes, it was new seeding on our hay ground, but we still weren't seeing the buttercup come back like it was in the pastures. So we tried a particular pasture that was one of our worst, and we pulled the cows off March 15th, and provided you got to have the hay to be able to do this, but we pulled the cows off March 15th and did not let them have that pasture back until the 1st of May. Grass was boot top high when we turned the cows in, but there was no buttercup. So it kind of told us that, overgrazing in the spring, I mean, for us, and I'm sure for most people in here, your cows stop eating hay on April 15th. They're out there picking every blade of grass they can come up with, and they just won't hardly touch the hay, even if the grass is, that short. So once that kind of showed us that might be a way to help eradicate buttercup or get a control on it, and in fact, you can see in that left-hand picture right there's just a little sprig. That was not taken intentionally, it just happened to be there. But we don't see it like we used to. In the pastures that we're able to manage like that in the spring, we have built, we call sacrificial feeding areas or spring feeding areas that once March rolls around, say the 15th or so, we fasten the cattle in there, continue them on hay, and just let that pasture grow. We still do spray with 2,4-D. I won't deny that, but we don't use near as much as we were because we're getting a control or a handle on that buttercup. Fertilizer prices, and it's been talked about today, but that's the other thing we're doing in our pastures. Now, not all our pastures look like this now, but we're getting there. it's been, 2 years, Dad, since we put any nitrogen or fertilizer on our pastures. And even in a year like this year, the drought year, I feel like that whatever stand of clover you would say that is, 35% of stand of Ladina clover and fescue. We also pull out the chain hair, go over our pastures about the time we pull the cows off in March, or whenever the ground is solid enough without making a lot of traction ruts. That the grass getting that jump, and again, this is just strictly what we're seeing, the grass getting that jump in the spring ahead of the weeds, and with the Ladina clover in there, that even on a dry year like this year, at the end of that midsummer drought, we still had a lot of pastures with grass boot top high. Whereas we drive around and everybody's pastures were gone and depleted. We all get the big rains. We're in a drought again now. Same thing. We've still got pasture at home that's almost boot top high in places. Now, granted, it's not full of moisture, but we didn't spend diesel fuel cutting some of those pastures and extra cuttings on our hay fields just to turn around and feed it right back to the cows. They're grazing it in the pastures right now. But again, in order for that to work, you've got to have hay to feed them. I think typically we when we pull them off on March 15th, we try to keep them off for about 6 weeks. We won't turn the cows out on new grass till the 1st of May. And again, that gets your grass up there to where it's ahead of the buttercup and the weeds. This is actually going to be a lot shorter than I've been planning for the last month since Jimmy asked me to do this. This is the first time I've ever spoken in front of a crowd this size. So I mentioned it earlier, we got 5 grandkids. That's my drive, that's my passion right there. I love my cows, but my grandkids are why I do what I do. Mom and Dad, in fact, today is Mom and Dad's 54th anniversary. And oh, there's Mom over there with my youngest grandson. And so without their support, my wife, my daughter there, my uncle at home who couldn't make it today, I wouldn't be able to do what I'm doing. I still go to them for advice. Dad's very active on the farm. My grandkids, I try to spend as much time with them as I can. That picture on the right, for me, is it. So I apologize if it wasn't as long or as educational as you might have wanted it to be, but really the things that we've done, the successes and failures that we've had in the last 10 years over reseeding, some things that we've done to increase our profits or decrease our expenses, because you can only sell your product for so much, whether it's bulls that we sell or heifers or whatever. So to cut the expenses, fighting fertilized prices, and again the grass to minimize the expense in the 2,4-D. But this is why I do what I do. I was told that I was supposed to entertain questions, so like it says there, as long as they ain't too hard. Yes, sir.
What did you do to get that stand on the dyno?
We just frost seed it. It's hit and miss. In the last several years, I know it's been hit and miss. We've had more failures than we had successes, and it's frustrating. But we just frost seed it.
Every year?
Once we get a stand like that, no, it maintains itself. But we try to do a little bit every year to get the whole farm done. Yes. Yes, sir.
Strictly grass-fed operation?
Combination. We're cow-calf operation. We sell seed stock bulls and bred heifers. So once we wean our calves, they do go on grain, mostly to maintain. And but then we've also ventured into the freezer beef market since the pandemic in 20. And but yeah, we're a combination. Yes, sir. 50 units. We do 50 units in the fall, and again, none in the spring, pasture or hay ground. It's just strictly, I know I read that somewhere, but I never really talked to anybody. We tried it, really thought we saw, a benefit to it. And I mentioned something to Jimmy about it, and he said, I'd like to do a trial out y'all's place for that. And I said, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, maybe, one particular hayfield, just take your buggy and, go up and back in the middle of it and then come back in the spring on the rest of it. He said, not a whole lot. Let's just see if it works. Well, I think we did 100 acres that year. That is a test, because if we're going to do it, we're going to do it big, and it does pay off for us.
You mentioned you're doing are you stocking them like you were stocking your pears, your cow-calf pears, in terms of giving them as much acreage?
No. No, we run dry lot on our freezer beef. Yeah, once the animal is whether it's a bull that is not considered to be a breeder, he's steered, and heifers that won't breed or considered undesirable as an animal, they just go on dry lot, and they are on full grain and hay.
How long, Jason, are those in dry lot?
Well, we've had this discussion. The more profitable ones are the better genetics that have characteristics, undesirable characteristics. So they're, on feed for, 100, 120 days. But then the animals that, when they hit the ground, you just know they're not going to make a bull or a heifer. They might be on feed for 200 days. They're just genetically, inferior.
Any other questions for Jason? Over here, Jason.
Oh, yes, sir.
Raw seed that clover, do you try to seed it on pasture that's clipped pretty short, or does it not matter?
Well, I won't say that it doesn't matter, but we do, just to be on the safe side. We don't like to graze that short, but if we know we're going to frost seed that pasture, we'll come in and let the cattle graze it a little bit harder in the fall, with plans to frost seed it in the winter. Now, we won't get our pick down to nothing. Earlier, it was mentioned that on the Lespedeza they use a chain harrow. If sometimes we'll do that, if the grass is not picked down as short as we'd like, we'll frost seed it, and then we'll come in with the chain harrow just to try to help it filter down to the ground. Yes, sir. Yes, sir. That's been our practice anyway.
Jason, do you have any other enterprises on the farm, like row crops?
No, we are 100%, and I have to apologize to UK about this. We're 100% Kentucky 31 and Ladina clover. We don't row crop at all. We had enough failures during those years that we tried orchard grass. We tried endophyte friendly types. Wasn't the seed's fault, but we'd had enough failures that we went back to Kentucky 31. But no, to answer your question, no, we don't row crop at all. And I didn't mention on the springtime feeding areas, some of our pastures, we do somewhat of a rotational grazing, but some of our pastures are anywhere from 15 acres to 60 acres. And so depending on the number of cattle that's running in that pasture is how big that sacrificial spring feeding area is. But something that I picked up from Chris at one of his presentations a few years back, or a year or so back, was those springtime feeding areas don't have to be left muddy, stomped up areas. You can come back in there with, we've used it from ryegrass to crabgrass to sorghum Sudan. I think my favorite personally is ryegrass. It's easy to get, and it's a little bit cheaper too. So, but then you got a benefit there. If you manage it right, you can creek graze on that. So it's not like you're just totally ruining an acre to 5 acres of ground. You do have that benefit to come back and seed that.